thanks so much for joining us for Impact State of Mind. My name is John Paul Parmigiani. I'm co-founder and CEO of Impact Hub New York Metropolitan Area. Impact Hub New York Metropolitan Area is a nonprofit supporting entrepreneurs and change makers through programs designed to help impactful ideas take off. We work across the New York metropolitan area broadly with focus areas in Manhattan, Queens, Newark, and Morristown, New Jersey. Impact Hub is a global association of more than 100 hubs in more than 50 countries around the world. Impact State of Mind is a virtual series that's created to support the social innovation ecosystem during the COVID-19 crisis. So thanks so much for joining today for the session, Why Design Thinking is Essential for Your Business, with Madelena Mac, who is a Senior Director of StartupBus and a user experience design expert. Madelena, thanks so much to come on to the show today. We are so happy to have you.
All right, shall we begin? All right, cool. Well, thanks for joining us on this rainy afternoon in New York City. So we're going to talk about design thinking. I think if you're not familiar with it, whether you're familiar with it or not familiar with it, it's good to have a refresher of how design is impactful for what you're trying to achieve for your social impact organization. So a little bit about myself. My name's Madelena, and I've been building products for the past 10, 15 years. You can check out my portfolio website at madelenamac.com. So it includes products such as Trillion, which hit #1 on the iOS App Store, FindDoc, which was one of the top doctor search engines in Southeast Asia, and also I work on ZocDoc, which is #1 doctor search engine here in America. I've spoken at a lot of different venues, such as at Google New York, and also on behalf of Start Out, which is LGBTQ entrepreneurship organization. So I speak a lot on topics on UX design as well as transgender equality. Lastly, of course, JP mentioned StartupBus, and StartupBus, our mission is to bridge the tech gap across America. So we've been featured on a lot of different media. We've been featured on TechCrunch, Huffington Post, NBC News made a short documentary about us last year, as well as Gimlet Media made a 5-episode series as well. So StartupBus is an amazing journey that every young entrepreneur should try at least once in their lifetime. We put 200 entrepreneurs on a bus, well, on multiple buses, coming from all corners of the United States, such as New York, Mexico, well, not just the United States, North America, right? New York, San Francisco, Akron, Ohio, Tampa Bay, Florida, Texas, and so on. And they all meet at New Orleans for the final showdown. So during the road trip on the road, during those 3 days they were on the road, they have to build a product from scratch. And at the very end, they learn how to pitch, and with a working prototype and pitch to real investors. So that's what we do every year. Obviously, we cannot put people on buses this year due to COVID-19, but we are still working hard to help young entrepreneurs to try to start a startup from scratch. So come back to design thinking. What exactly is design thinking, right? If you had heard about this term before, I mean, it's a buzzword for at least the past 10 years, I would say. It was popularized way back in 2008 by IDEO, which is one of the top industrial design firms in the States. And it's about it's not just useful for like design, right? Like industrial design or product design, but it's the way it thinks that can help any organization as well. So what is design thinking, right? Design thinking, simply put, is how designers think, how designers approach a problem and come up with a solution. So a lot of times people like to talk about like how people are creative, how they come up with all these amazing ideas, as if like it comes out of thin air, right? But there's actually a system behind it that can help people to become creative. Next slide. So this is a meme that a lot of you may have seen before. So how to draw a panda in 4 simple steps. It's always like, well, first you draw 2 circles, and voila, you draw a panda. Of course, design is not like that. Even though in mainstream media, people like to portray this like Mad Men, like somehow they just come up with all these brilliant ideas for advertisement. Or like Leonardo da Vinci somehow is a genius that knows how to make like prototypes of airplanes to like defense mechanisms for like cities. But what you don't really know usually is their process and how they create ideas and how they solve problems. And you can also learn how to be creative by learning how designers think. And that's why design thinking is important. So a lot of times when, on StartupBus, we've seen a lot of different startups. Very often we see young founders trying to approach the solution right away. Sometimes like an idea person, they like to think that they are very brilliant and they have the stroke of genius and like that idea is like the best thing ever. But it actually doesn't work that way. It's actually a common mistake that many company stakeholders make, is to jump right into coming up with solutions. And that's actually is a very wasteful way of like using the company time, efforts, and resources. You might think that like, whoa, what do you mean by that, right? Like jumping right into a solution means that like I save time for doing all those user research, all those like workshop and sessions like that. I at least shave off a few weeks of time. Why do you think that is a waste of time? Well, when you build a solution right away without, understanding what the problems actually is, it means spending a lot of time, labor, and resources on an unproven and unknown solution that may not even be useful or functional for anyone. So you could have, with your team of developers and spend like all the investors' money for 3 months and build a product, and by then realize that nobody actually wants to use it, and that would be too late, and that would be a huge waste of resources. And design thinking is to avoid that by really understanding 3 factors to innovation, right? There are 3 things. This slide is from Ideation, which is the company that I mentioned before. And there's 3 things that you need to look at in the research process. One is the feasibility. Second is the desirability. And third thing is the viability. The feasibility is technical. Desirability is how much users crave for those like features, and viability is the business goals. And when all those 3 things intersect, you have innovation. Not just 2 of them, not just 1 of them. When 3 of them intersect, that's when you really have an innovative idea. So it's not just problem to solution, right? It's actually, you have to take the time to really try to define what the problem is, define who your users are. I mean, the whole point user experience design is called user experience design because it's centered around the users. And before coming to a solution, there's actually many different steps before that. One of the ways to organize the entire design process that I really like to use is called a revamped double diamond design process. This chart may look complicated, but it's actually very straightforward. So from left to right is basically the time, the process throughout the entire project. And it goes through 4 phases. So there's a research phase, which is the first half of the first diamond, where ideas diverge. So what diverging means is you're creating choices, trying to come up with as many things as possible. And stages that are converging it means making choices. You're distilling all the things that you learn into like one nugget that you can use, that the entire team is aligned with. So the first stage is discover. That includes like creating a creative brief, understanding what you're really researching. You know, there's a lot of things that you can ask, like what are we like going to ask about? And in this phase, you try to be as open as possible. A lot of times that I see like what young founders would do is that they essentially would basically, how we call it, they would try to do research to essentially prove what they think is correct. And they would try hard to find evidences that prove what they had already assumed. And that is the wrong attitude to go. In fact, during this phase, you should be as open as possible and allow like the research surprise you. You know, your idea is not as sacred as you might think. What you actually find in this process and inform your idea makes your idea a lot stronger. The second phase is define. Define means that it's a converging state and it's combining all the researches that you've done into like one single point that you can, as the basis, the North Star that you can base on for the actual, what you usually think hiring designer for stages, which is the ideation phase and the implementation phase. So we're going to go a little more in detail in each of these phases. So first things first, for any of the design thinking approach is to understand the problem. And most people don't make much of an effort to explore the problem space before they explore the solution space. And that's a big mistake because, as I mentioned before, the mistake is to try and empathize and connect the stated problems only to their own experiences. So a lot of founders just end up, they think that they're talking to the users. They think that like for like the dozens of people that they know that they talk to, and it verifies what they think, and they think that they're pretty good to go for the research. And that is not good because it falsely leads to the belief that you really understand the whole situation. When the situation really is always evolving and there's always new things to learn and there's never enough research to be done. There can always be new aspects from like people that you have never met before, and the possibilities is endless. And that user research should be an ongoing goal for your company for that reason, because there's like there would be like your user base would be changing over time. Your user base will have different needs over time because the world is changing as well. So it's important to really catch up and understand what's going on with the user the whole time while you're leading the company. So there's many different ways to empathize with the user. And generally there are two things that you look at, you want to have, at least for your minimum viable research. There needs to be something qualitative and something quantitative. Quantitative means on the scale of 1 to 10, how likely would you use the product? Something that you can measure and compare the before and after over time. Something that you can make sure that that's the metric that your product is based on. So quantitative is important. But if everything is just quantitative, it's impossible to empathize with the users. It's important to try to really understand like different users' stories. And the only way to do it is really to conduct user interviews, like to go talk to the people directly, like to understand like what their needs are. And one thing that is particularly important is to talk to the users in the context of what how they would use the app. So for example, if you were trying to build an application that is for low-income folks in low-income communities trying to navigate all the different programs that the city provides. It's not only important to understand their needs by speaking and chatting directly and understand the lives of these people that you're trying to help, but it is also important to look at it in context. Where would they be using the application, right? Would they be using them at home, or would they be accessing it from a public library? So it's good to really have at least a few of your studies to be what we call ethnographic field research. It means really studying the groups and people as they go about with their everyday lives. So you can get a full picture to empathize with the users. And like I said before, there's qualitative and quantitative research. Quantitative research, there's a lot of things you can do, such as setting a quality rule that is a Q&A that's embedded in a website, or you can send a type form for a survey that you can send through mailing list. You can also do things such as Google Analytics to measure anything that is existing for your product, as well as eye tracking tests and many different mechanisms that can even verify the optimal placement of elements that is on the screen. And then it comes to the second phase, which is to define. In this case, it is to define the goals. And it really is a stage that requires clarity. The right words are very important. Instead of saying something arbitrary or saying something that works for a sales pitch, it doesn't necessarily work for product design. So you could have said, well, I want to build a blockchain, everybody likes blockchain, a blockchain platform for what would that be? For bikes, for bicycles. And that's not clear enough. It needs to be defined in a way that is how a user would approach a problem that you would solve. So instead of saying a blockchain platform for bikes, it should be create a way for bike owners around New York City to secure their bicycles electronically, right? So that would be a much clearer goal. Or maybe instead of electronically, say by using encryption of a blockchain. And that goal definition is important because if you don't define the goals correctly, you don't target the right problem to solve. And if you don't target the right problem to solve, it's hard to frame the problem in a way that invites creative solutions. So there are a few ways that you do to solve, to help them define goals. I mean, if you have ever been an accelerator, you might have come across something similar to that. It's probably a business canvas that you use, but this is more a user-centered design canvas. So it's slightly different. It's instead of putting your business at the center of the canvas, this is about putting your user at the very much center of the canvas. Right? The user is in the center block right here, and how everything around the user affect their decisions. So this is where you can see what the motives and fears and problems and solutions that a user needs, and also how your business can create a unique value proposition to meet them. So a few things that if you had ever had a user researcher, if you haven't done a persona yet, at least have one persona, because it's really hard to empathize with the user if you cannot even describe what your user's goals and motivations and frustrations really are. Right? That's what a persona is for, and that's what the entire team can discuss their product based on. Right? We're designing for these users, not some other imaginary users that is only in our head. So this is a common blueprint that everybody can base their storytelling on and help build empathy that way. Another very useful tool is what we call experience map, right? To really follow the user from the beginning stages, first approaching your product, to using your product, to finally retiring from the product. And it's displayed in the format of a timeline. Then it comes to the third stage, which is ideation. And I think especially for companies that are focused on social impact, ideation workshops should not be just something amongst designers or like stakeholders of the company. Ideation workshop is a great way to have the community that you're serving, to have a voice to speak and let them feel heard. So what we usually call, in this case, is a community-oriented design. And it's powerful because unlike a business where we often have like a single decision maker, a service that is aiming for social impact have many different decision makers and have many different people that are being affected. And having them to solve this problem together and have a common voice, it's a lot more effective and efficient. It also helps them build awareness of what's going on and how to help them feel that they had contributed as part of the community. So some of the key questions that you are asked in an ideation workshop. First of all, looking at all the research that we have done, well, can they help point out what the insights of the research is from their unique point of view, right? So what is going on? What is this thing that we're trying to build? And a great way to come up with ideas and being creative, like for brainstorming, is to ask what if questions. So in the case of like trying to build, well, like the example before, like to build a way to secure bicycles with blockchain, right? As ridiculous as it may sound, it might actually happen. But like we can ask what if, or like, well, what if instead of thinking about bicycles with blockchain, what if it's about, like hoverboards? What if it's about the two parties, instead of it's a private owned bicycle, it's a public owned bicycle, bike share program. And by looking at the same problem in different angles, it helps you create different ways to look at things, and it helps you create ideas. And then at the end, we ask, well, what wows? Like, what is the things that really delight you? What are the things that like, wow, like when you come up with, like during the brainstorming session, like that's a must have that like you really feel that strongly that needs to be happening. And with that, mood board is a way for branding to understand like what ideas would be like attractive to a community that you're aiming for. After that is a pretty fairly standard fare of product design, right? You have like defining product requirements, content strategies. This you definitely have seen before, right? Doing sitemaps or wireflows, right? Information architecture, trying to figure out like how these different types of information are related to each other, how these different pages are related to each other. Wireframes, what people usually think they hire UX designers for, but it's actually just the tip of the iceberg, as you can see. And then like making prototypes of tests, right? You have the users that you have done research with previously to come back to try out what's going on. And lastly, once you got everything done, it's about handing over to the designers that will be working on this in the future, and also the developers that will be working on this with you simultaneously. Things like style guide or like a design system, which is essentially how these different types of interactions can be modularized or componentized and can be reused for like different pages that you can create, like Lego box. And at the end, right, there's like this agile testing process to make sure that everything you do like matches the eye tracking test, like the results that you want, matches the metrics that you defined earlier. So that's design thinking in short. And designers represent the user in your company. So if your company still haven't hired a designer yet, you don't have like a fierce advocate of users in the company. And they are important because they provide a source of truth of who your users are about. So I think we can go to a little bit of Q&A session here. What do we have here, JD? I don't think anyone asked any open questions. Cool.
Yeah, so if anyone has any questions, you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So please feel free. Madelena can answer questions for the next number of minutes until we try to be respectful of everyone's time until 4:30 when we have a hard stop. So please feel free to ask away, and if we don't, then I guess we'll also conclude the session.
Yeah, I mean, if not, I can go through a little bit of case study to help explain what it's like for design thinking and use, right? So just a very short case study. Actually, it's about StartupBus. Does that sound good, JP?
Yeah, let's hear it.
All right. So StartupBus, when I first came in 2017, this is a funny slide. That was like late 2017. That was Me Too happened. So a lot of the people that we think are leaders in tech turns out to be not very good leaders in tech. So Dave McClure from 500 Startups was one of them. He was ardent supporters of us, but he is canceled, unfortunately. Well, actually, fortunately, if I put it that way. And that actually gives us, that was a signal to us that we need to change because our demographics had been very homogenous and focused on like the male tech developer stereotype. And we know that we need change. So how can we like attack this problem, right? So first thing that we did is to really like try to talk to everyone that is involved. Like I did my research with like every directors, like previous StartupBus, and also like did research with the community. Like sometimes like since this is a community that is online, a lot of those user interviews is online as well. So you can actually do the user interview on Slack, on Facebook chat. And having like everyone have an input, it helps like drive our common goal together forward. And together we came up with a few things that is important for the community, right? We realized that we need to reach out to previously neglected community. It's not an only ethical, it's also a practical solution because we exhausted our existing tech audiences and also help us reach out new sponsors. And to have a consistent social marketing plan so we can like revive our presence in the press. And with that, right, there's a lot of things that we skip in between. We've done like user survey, like we try to look at the brand guidelines, right? This is like not just aesthetically, but also in terms of tone, right? So things like realizing that our previous language is a little alienating, right? So like, for example, for photo subject matter, we realized that you cannot have like all subjects from the same demographic. It needs to have a nice spectrum of all races and gender. We also realized that, for example, in the tone and language, we need to keep it inclusive so that we can attract a new demographic and like balance like the dominant culture. With all those things that is in place, we are able to double our gender diversity from 20% to 40% with all those new inclusive branding. And we increase the web traffic of our website as well. WWF. So that was amazing. That was done over the course of 6 months. So yeah, that's how design thinking can have a tremendous impact on your organization. And it's always good to follow through. Despite like stakeholders might push back, it's important to really study and do the research and be able to empathize with the users. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madelena, for joining us, and everyone who attended online. Hope you have a really great rest of your week and weekend, and looking forward to seeing you on future sessions. Thanks so much, Madelena.
Yeah,
And
thanks
happy
for having
Pride.
me. Yeah, happy Pride.